Brewster here with New Brewster's Millions of Rants, and this is horror movies that shred. And this episode's actually going to conclude the month of October, which is Metal Month here on my channel. And where did October go? It just blew right by. It feels like we just started this, and here I am ending it at the end of the month. Crazy. And I did hit a lot of things that I wanted to feature, this month. The theme for this month's Metal Month has been connecting horror with hard rock and metal. And I had lots of examples of that, in various episodes for this month. But then this episode is really just going to be a rant. We're going to learn some licks, actually, from some of these horror movies. But there are certain films that actually feature guitarists, feature bands, obviously feature, hard rock and metal music. But I'm basically targeting those horror films that actually feature guitar, actual guitars on screen, maybe a guitar solo during the movie, or maybe the plot, involves a band, or maybe they're on the road or in the studio or whatever. And that's basically what I'm hitting in this episode. So with the intro, that was actually Draven's guitar solo from the film The Crow, which is definitely a legendary film. And Brandon Lee actually did play guitar, even though he didn't technically play that during the movie. That was somebody else, like in a studio session. But it's really interesting to find, that guitar moment right in the middle of that movie. So for Draven's guitar solo, it's really just a series of these melodic variations for that first part, like this. And the second pass, that melody's got a slight variation. Right there. And the third pass, slight variation. And after that third variation, then he starts doing this pedal point thing. And that E note is your pedal point right there, that G to E, A to E, B to E. Actually, he does G to E, A to E, and then does A to E again, and then B to E, C to E, B to E, A to E, G to E, and then he starts doing power chords after that, like this. And a C power chord to a D to an E octave. Right? And then C octave, D octave to E octave. Then he starts doing minor pentatonic trills right there. Just kind of like walk up the box right there, like this E minor pentatonic box. What he's doing there. And then right here. And then right there. And then right there. And after that G and A, you want to shift up and grab this B and D. And then hop over to the high E and grab E and G right there. So after those trills, he basically grabs a harmonic on the 5th fret there on that G note and dives his bar. I'm using the Paul Reed Smith. There's no bar on this guitar. So I just bent that A note, almost kind of matching the harmonic he screamed. And then he dives the bar at the end, and I just detuned my low E to kind of mimic that. And then, of course, right after that, he smashes his guitar. So I'm not going to do that in this episode. Sorry. I like this Paul Reed Smith. I'm not going to smash it. But definitely The Crow is legendary. Great film. Okay, next up is Slumber Party Massacre II. Definitely a legendary bad horror film that features a drill guitar. It's basically this erratic, weird-looking guitar with a drill, like basically where the headstock's supposed to be. Very interesting movie. It's not a good film, so don't seek this out thinking, I'm recommending a good movie. No, this one's a stinker. But the drill guitar is legendary, and it was actually recently repaired, which is interesting. There really aren't any good guitar licks in Slumber Party Massacre 2, unfortunately, but you're going to see things like this, and I didn't really want to show this because it's really just like a single bent note, but like this. And the main bad guy is definitely chasing people around with the drill guitar in scenes like this. He almost sticks it in the girl's butt.
Hey, did you hear something?
So The Crow is a good film with a good guitar scene. Slumber Party Massacre II is not a good film, but it has an interesting guitar. And then more recently, like the series Stranger Things, definitely season 4 with Eddie Munson's, guitar moment. I mean, when I watched that, I mean, it was Metallica's Master of Puppets. But when I watched that, I got up off the couch. I was like, yeah, this is awesome. Next up's the obscure horror film Blood Tracks, and this is really a bad horror movie, but I always give this movie props because Kee Marcello is actually in the film. Kee Marcello from Europe. He does get his head chopped off in the movie, sorry for the spoiler, but really interesting, and definitely any horror movie that stars rock stars, I want to see it. So the film Blood Tracks actually features the band Easy Action, which was the band that Kee played with before he joined forces with Europe. And there's moments in the film, where you can see him. Here's a clip right here with, the band rocking out. Check out the singer. He's losing his mind. And then it pans over and you can see Kee Marcello right here. So there's no question, as far as heavy metal horror films, the guitar of choice definitely appears to be BC Rich, because I've gone through a bunch of movies trying to put this episode together, and I noticed BC Rich Warlocks, BC Rich Ironbirds, tons of BC Rich guitars everywhere. So definitely, if you are into this heavy metal horror kind of moment, if you have a BC Rich guitar, grab it, because you have to use that while you're playing with this lesson. Technically this month I've already talked about Black Roses, and I've also talked about Trick or Treat. And speaking of BC Rich, guitars, especially BC Rich Ironbird, Trick or Treat, the film, definitely features that legendary guitar. Check out this image right here. We've already talked about Trick or Treat, through the Fastway chord play episode, but here's another clip kind of showing Trick or Treat and that BC Rich Ironbird. For another example, this BC Rich fascination, check out Shock 'Em Dead from 1991. Definitely, this is my all-time favorite heavy metal horror film. I ranted about this about 5 years ago, during Metal Month. But I had to include this again, mainly because it's Michael Angelo Batio doing a lot of the guitar work. He's using the double neck, like double guitar. It's a double, BC Rich Ironbird that's white. Totally badass. But you have to watch Shock 'Em Dead if you're a guitarist, especially a shred guitarist, metal guitarist with a horror fan. If you mix all that up together, Shock 'Em Dead is your film. So Shock 'Em Dead has plenty of great guitar moments, from Michael Angelo Batio, but there are moments like this, which here's a bad guitar solo from that film. We're not going to learn that, because that's pretty bad. But there's another scene in the film where the main character comes out playing Michael Angelo's double, BC Rich Ironbird. And he starts doing this, like, evil harmony thing, like this. So that's the first guitar, right? And I'm going to loop that with the MXR clone looper right there. Guitar 2 right here. So it's just like thirds or whatever right there. So you're basically doing that and this, together. But check out the scene from this movie. Also in Shock 'Em Dead's this really cool diminished bass idea that Michael was shifting around like this. So honestly, for this lick, Michael's using 24 frets on his double guitar, BC Rich. So I don't have 24 frets on any of my guitars. So I had to leave the highest one out to basically kind of repurpose this lick. But he's really just moving this diminished idea up in minor thirds like this. There's actually technically one more that he grabs, reaching that 24th fret. Then he ends on that D note. And then it's like C sharp to D or whatever at the end. And then slowly one more time. Alright, the last movie I'm going to rant about in this episode is Rocktober Blood from 1984. Definitely not a good horror film. It's a pretty bad movie, but it's legendary, a cult classic. Directly involves bands and guitar solos and the whole thing. Actually, the band Sorcery is the band that kind of did a lot of the music for this movie, and it's kind of overlooked. A lot of people, I've talked to don't know Rocktober Blood, but definitely it's a great film if you're a guitarist or you play in a band or you're looking for this music horror kind of connection. Rocktober Blood's worth, a watch. So I've always found it interesting that the main, bad guy from Rocktober Blood looks exactly like the character that's on the front of Halloween's album Walls of Jericho. Rocktober Blood's from 1984, Walls of Jericho's from 1985. So I have a feeling the artist definitely used, Rocktober Blood's monster or creature as an influence or inspiration for that artwork. And like I mentioned during the beginning of this segment, focusing on Rocktober Blood, the band Sorcery, definitely an overlooked and kind of obscure band from the 70s and 80s. Sorcery's the band that did the music in Rocktober Blood. There is a soundtrack floating around out there somewhere. I've never even seen the soundtrack. I'd like to. But, interesting kind of obscure band. I tried to dig around and find as much as I could about Sorcery, but there's really not that much floating around out there. During the film, Rocktober Blood, there is a scene where they basically are playing the song Killer on the Loose, and the beginning of that song has this extended guitar solo, and they basically feature like the entire guitar solo on camera. It goes on for like a minute and a half or something, and I'm a guitarist. I love shredding and guitar solos, but even I was like, come on, wrap this up, guys. Because it feels like it just leaves the movie for a minute, then you have this guitar moment, and it's like, what were they doing? But anyway, I'm not going to show that. But this is a riff from the song Rainbow Eyes, which is in Rocktober Blood. This is Sorcery. And it totally has that 80s, like new wave British heavy metal kind of sound like this. Something like that, short and sweet, really basic, but I like that riff. It's a cool 80s rock riff. That A power chord, partial C, partial D. And then you just start on this G and roll down to that low E open. And do that first riff again with the power chords. And right there, start with the low E open and then just walk all the way up to that D and then start the riff over. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Brewster's Millions of Rants with this look at horror movies that shred. And there are many other movies out there that feature bands and the guitar. There are definitely better films, but I am a sucker for these bad horror films, especially from the 80s and 90s. But, you can definitely find good examples of this. But I think back in the day, there was so much focus on the guitar, especially like bands like Van Halen and stuff exploded. You got to think Rocktober Blood's 1984. You got to think like 83 and 84 just exploded. Quiet Riot, Come On Feel the Noise, and eventually Van Halen, releasing 1984 in 1984. Those albums and moments are kind of reflected in these films. Rocktober Blood has lots of guitar solos and stuff. Really that scene with the extended solo, it's like they listened to Van Halen, maybe they caught like a Night Ranger concert, and then they filmed that movie where you could tell it's like they're all just rocking out and inspired with 80s, hard rock and metal, which is so cool. So I'm a sucker for this. I love this time of year. I love Halloween. It's my favorite holiday. The leaves are changing. It gets a little cooler outside. Put on a horror movie, maybe eat some candy or whatever. I love it. So I basically do this for myself. This is pleasing me during the month of October. I love this time of year. I love hard rock and metal. I love horror films. This is basically a variation of what I did when I was a teenager and a little punk kid. Watching movies, playing guitar, trying to learn as much as I could. And anytime I saw a guitarist or a guitar, a band or whatever in a film, I got extra excited where it's like, yeah, I'm watching this movie and that's what I'm trying to do, right there. I love this stuff. It's nostalgia. Obviously, it's spooky because of Halloween and horror films, but definitely, that's why I do this every year during October. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. And happy Halloween!